China, once a weak and impoverished country, has undergone a tremendous transformation rarely seen in human history. It's reinvigorating itself, re-emerging as a major economic powerhouse. It's also opening up and interacting with the world like never before. What has happened since the People's Republic of China was founded in 1949? How has the country engaged with the world in the last 70 years? This 5-episode documentary retraces the path China has taken, examining how it has impacted and has been impacted by the world. The world today is facing new challenges. Protectionism and unilateralism are on the rise. Globalization is at a crossroads. How to tackle these issues? China is calling for the world to unite and create a community of shared future for mankind. The 5th episode examines this concept and investigates how China is putting it into action. With snow covering the roof of Europe, Switzerland once again entered Davos time. Economic uncertainties and anti-globalization sentiments were casting a shadow as the 2017 World Economic Forum opened in the Swiss Alps. WEF founder and chairman Klaus Schwab said at the opening of the forum, "In a world marked by great uncertainty and volatility, the world is looking to China." Witnessed by political and business leaders around the world, Chinese President Xi Jinping brought his solution to the podium.
只要我们牢固树立人类命运共同体意识，携手努力，共同担当，同舟共济，共度难关，就一定能够让世界更美好，让人民更幸福。
The idea of a community of shared future for mankind has regularly been expounded by the Chinese leader on various diplomatic occasions since 2012. The concept advocates that all nations should work together for a better common future. It calls for forging partnerships in which countries treat one another as equals, engage in mutual consultation, and demonstrate mutual understanding. Observers believe that the thought is consistent with traditional Chinese philosophy.
The concept of creating a community of shared future for mankind stems from Chinese traditional culture and the philosophy of harmony and unity, which calls for a shared community for all nations. It is also derived from the desire of the Chinese communists to integrate the well-being of the Chinese people with that of the people in the rest of the world. It reflects the common values pursued by all mankind of peace, development, cooperation, mutual benefit, fairness, justice, democracy, and freedom.
It is also consistent with the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence which China proposed alongside Burma, now Myanmar, and India in the 1950s.
In 1955, Premier Zhou Enlai, Indian Prime Minister Nehru and Burmese Prime Minister U Nu proposed the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence, which stated that, despite their different social systems, countries would not interfere in one another's internal affairs and would peacefully coexist.
It was the initiation of the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence that brought the country to the notice of the rest of the world in the early days of New China. The 5 principles were widely welcomed by the newly independent nations in the anti-colonial movement that had grown out of the post-war era, and they brought China and other developing countries closer to each other. In the 1970s, when the Cold War was casting a shadow over the world, the confrontation between China and the US-led West was about to reach a turning point. In the Chinese capital, Beijing, another week is just beginning. Monday is 20-year-old American Shane Oliver's favorite day of the week.
My name is Shane Alf. I'm from Brooklyn, New York. I am actually just turned 28 this year. I have been teaching English here in a company that works with children and early childhood education.
The highlight of Shane's day is when he leaves the classroom to head to the table tennis gymnasium.
I've been here in Beijing for 7 years, and because I love this sport, ping-pong. It's the national sport here. So for another country to take ping-pong under their... When I first came here for the first 2 or 3 years, I played ping-pong 3 or 4 times a week. Didn't feel much improvement.
你想拿 A 这么飞过去，这个弧线是你自己制造出来的，千万不要发力，就轻轻的完成。对。
Former national coach Li Jin is so infected by Shane's enthusiasm for table tennis that he agreed to train him every Monday. As Shane improves, he dreams of one day playing against his idol, world champion Ma Long.
I think for me, what would be really exciting is if I could actually meet and practice with Chinese national team. But if I could actually practice with them for even one day, but perhaps for a month would be great. I can increase my level drastically, very quickly. So this is really why I'm looking for you, Ma Long. Hey, Grandma. I love you.
Today, many young Americans, like Shane, are learning in their history class that ping-pong is much more than a sport. It once changed how the US and China viewed each other and transformed the world pattern. Towards the end of the 1960s, US President Richard Nixon and his National Security Advisor Henry Kissinger began mulling the benefits of restoring relations with China. They saw the move as a means of both exiting the battlefields in Vietnam and acquiring leverage in the Cold War. The two countries eventually opened a secret dialogue. But the real breakthrough came courtesy of a public encounter between the Chinese and US ping-pong teams during the 1971 World Table Tennis Championships in Nagoya, Japan. Liang Geliang is now 69. During his career, he participated in numerous international table tennis tournaments, but none sticks in his memory like the Nagoya Championships 48 years ago.
The gold medal in the middle, that's from the 31st World Table Tennis Championships. I was the winner in the team and doubles events. This is a photograph of me playing with Zhuang Zedong. Each team was allotted a time to train in the arena before the competition. We were about to leave for training. A bus was pulling up. It was specially for the Chinese players. Suddenly, Cohen approached. He was this young American with long hair. He should have been on the US team bus, but it had already left. Our bus was still there, with the door open, so he just got on. As soon as he got on the bus and turned around, we saw the USA logo on his clothing. The whole bus suddenly went quiet.
The Chinese players on the bus had no idea what to do about the situation. Only Zhuang Zedong, the team's leading player, reacted. He stepped forward to shake Cohen's hand and speak to him through an interpreter.
We arrived at the gym. We were surprised to see so many reporters there taking pictures. Zhuang got off the bus and presented Cohen with a Hangzhou silkscreen picture.
The encounter was captured on film, and the spontaneous show of goodwill between the US and Chinese teams became the talk of the tournament. A few days later, as the US team was preparing to leave Nagoya, they received an unexpected invitation from Beijing to visit China.
The whole world paid attention. Table tennis had a profound impact on the process of China and the US establishing diplomatic ties.
The signal was picked up by President Nixon. On the same day that the US table tennis team was welcomed by Premier Zhou Enlai in Beijing, Nixon announced that Washington was easing its travel restrictions and trade embargo against China. The ripple effects of what had already become known as ping-pong diplomacy paved the way for Richard Nixon's groundbreaking February 1972 visit to China. The two countries were taking the first steps toward normalizing relations. This included signing the historic Shanghai Communique, which marked the end of mutual confrontation. Nixon later called it the week that changed the world. Compared to Glenn Cowan's accidental encounter with the Chinese team in 1971, Shane Oliver's experience with China's table tennis players seems far more mundane.
I was wondering, do you have any time tonight?
He's received a call from his friend Zhu Fang. The former top table tennis player knows many members of the Chinese national team and has agreed to help.
Shane, do you think it'd be possible to help me to reach out to Malo, just to tell him, like, hey, there's this foreigner over here that wants to play ping pong with you? Is that possible? Oh my gosh.
Of course, I will try to help you. Anyway, you like table tennis.
Ordinary people like Shane Oliver are living in a world shaped by ping-pong diplomacy. The most fitting metaphor for the impact it had globally was provided by Chairman Mao himself. The little ball, he said, moves the big ball. The ice-breaking between China and the United States triggered an immediate chain effect in the West. By the end of the 1970s, all the major European nations had established diplomatic ties with China.
Nixon's trip to China triggered a new wave of China and European countries establishing diplomatic relations, most notably the major powers in Europe.
The improvement of the China-US relationship changed the pattern of international relations. It was a prelude to a policy that China would launch at the end of 1978. At a meeting of the country's top leadership, Deng Xiaoping announced a shift in the country's focus to economic development by means of a policy he called reform and opening up. The reform has changed China profoundly, allowing it to embrace the world, beginning with trade and eventually expanding into every area of Chinese society. At the same time, the world has also unleashed the huge potential of China, to the extent that it is today the world's second largest economy. China and the world have, since 1978, grown closer than ever before. As President Xi Jinping said, the past 4 decades have witnessed how China could promote an open world economy and build a community of shared future for mankind. But China's economic success has been so much more than soaring economic figures. It's hard to imagine today that when China launched the economic reform in 1978, more than 88% of its population were living on less than $2 a day. Decades of reform and opening up have fueled the most remarkable achievements in poverty alleviation in human history.
We wanted to accomplish the task of providing adequate food and clothing for all, with no one ethnic group, no one individual, and no one family left behind. This was something rare in the world.
This is Nandan County in South China's Guangxi Zhuang Autonomous Region. Part of the Yungui Plateau, this mountainous area is famous for its karst landforms. The scenery may be beautiful, but for the local community it means poverty, because there's hardly any land fit for farming and building roads. Li Rongbin's plot of land was too small to support his family by farming. 9 family members had to live in a small shelter measuring less than 40 square meters. But since June 2017, Li Rongbin's village has been included in a relocation project, which is part of a massive poverty reduction campaign in Guangxi. 1.4 billion yuan has been invested in building 2,400 new apartments. Li and another 13,000 people have now left areas with extremely poor living conditions and have moved into new apartments.
I find it hard to believe that the country would give me an apartment to live in. We used to live in a shelter, but now we're living in a beautiful apartment. It's way better than before.
Its huge economic success on the global market has provided the resources for China to step up its efforts to reduce domestic poverty. Having made poverty reduction a key political target for the Communist Party and the central government, President Xi Jinping has, ever since taking office, travelled extensively investigating the situation in areas of extreme poverty and build an all-round well-off society by 2020, using all the resources available. In their brand new 160 square metre apartment, the Li family are starting a new life. Li has found a job in construction and his children are attending the local school. "400 kilometres away in Longshan County. Around 2,000 years ago, Pan Yanqin's ancestors built a terrace field to maximise the use of the slope. What their ancestors bequeathed to them will become critical in their escape from poverty. Unlike Li's village, which has been relocated, Pan's village will be preserved. Roads have been paved and the power grid connected. The spectacular terraces are central to Longshan's development plan, as tourism is becoming the pillar industry here. Pan worked away from her home village as a migrant worker for many years. Now she's returned. She and her husband are running a small hotel for tourists. The bond between her and her ancestors is being preserved. President Xi Jinping has proposed the concept of poverty alleviation that is targeted. It requires the government to precisely identify who are poor and the reasons for their poverty. This is in order to work out appropriate measures for helping them, from improving social services to infrastructure development to basic medical services. An online database has been established as a poverty registry covering 128,000 villages, nearly 90 million people. The database is updated on an annual basis. She has called on Communist Party organisations at the grassroots level to take the lead in poverty alleviation. Some 540,000 officials have been dispatched to the front line. That means, on average, 4 officials will look after each of the 128,000 villages registered. They will stay there for 2 to 3 years, exclusively working on the local development plan and coordinating resources for the villages. Based on the $1.9 a day poverty line, in the past 4 decades, China has lifted 850 million people out of poverty, with a percentage of those living in extreme poverty falling from 88% to less than 2%. China, as the greatest contributor to global poverty alleviation, accounts for over 70% of the world's population lifted out of poverty in the same period. Experts believe that China's success in poverty reduction is a major contribution to humanity.
In the worldwide poverty reduction campaign, the share we've accounted for amounts to 70%. This is based on the fact that we used to be relatively poor and backward, so we cannot underestimate this achievement.
At the same time, China is also offering its help to other countries in their fight against poverty. Many African countries have welcomed a steady stream of Chinese agricultural experts. China has also trained tens of thousands of people for local communities, including teachers, school managers, agricultural technicians, and medical workers. In Shanghai, a group of experts attending the 2019 seminar on China-Africa Regional Aviation Cooperation are heading to the headquarters of the Commercial Aircraft Corporation of China.
So normally the instructor sits here, captain and first officer, and this is the...
Maureen Mwoyo from Uganda is fascinated by the flight simulator of the ARJ-21, CEO MAC's twin-engined regional jet.
It's a very nice experience. They train them how the aircraft takes off in any condition, either weather condition and all that. It looks very amazing.
But her colleague Jeremia Chitogigo from the Mozambique Civil Aviation Bureau is more interested in other features of the model.
I work for the government of Mozambique, doing research work on civil aviation. I'm responsible for flight safety and navigation.
This trip to China has been invaluable for the group, who are all key figures managing Africa's airspace.
Then also our friends from the African continent, we have tried to create a relationship to be together so we can always reach out for each other even when we go back home.
Mauritius is an island state. I must say that we have only one airport, one international airport over the island.
The aviation industry is generally growing. There is a lot of potential because it is still underdeveloped.
The 21-day intensive program they're participating in is intended to boost the immature but growing aviation sector in Africa and create greater opportunities for cooperation in aeroplane manufacturing. Numerous similar exchange programs between Africa and China are being organized every year.
Since the end of 2012, we've trained nearly 90,000 professionals for Africa. Since the 2018 Beijing summit of the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation in particular, we focused on carrying out 8 major initiatives. In the capacity building program, China will provide 50,000 training opportunities for citizens of African countries. China and Africa are involved in training exchange and cooperation in many fields, including healthcare, medical services, economy and trade, culture, sports, manufacturing, and public management.
Making up for the shortfall in talent has always been a critical part of China's foreign aid, combined with other approaches designed to solve infrastructure gridlock and inadequate funding. China's foreign aid program has been the subject of recurring but gradual reforms, a trend that mirrors the country's overall economic trajectory and one that continues today. The practice can be traced back to the early years of New China, when Beijing strengthened its relations and friendship with the African countries by supporting their anti-colonial movements. This support included the 2,000-kilometre Tanzania-Zambia Railway. Since then, China's approach to foreign assistance has coalesced around a set of principles emphasizing recipient countries' sovereignty and mutual benefit. In the course of carrying out its own historic reforms, Beijing has built strong relationships with developing economies, continuing to provide aid in a bid to promote South-South cooperation.
Well, I think China has been actively involved around the world for a very long time. We saw the start really of South-South cooperation, and China's been very active in South-South cooperation with other developing countries ever since then.
In the year 2000, the United Nations member states unanimously adopted 8 Millennium Development Goals to be achieved by 2015. Number 1 was to eradicate extreme poverty and hunger. Thanks in part to China's domestic efforts and its support for poverty reduction in the rest of the world, the target of reducing extreme poverty rates by half was met 5 years ahead of the deadline. Over the past 6 decades, China has provided nearly 400 billion yuan in aid to 166 countries and international organizations, dispatched more than 600,000 aid workers, and supplied medical assistance to 69 countries. More than 700 Chinese citizens have given their lives for the sake of the development of other countries. Asia and Africa, home to the largest poor populations, received 80% of China's foreign aid.
Distinguished officials, dear friends, a very good morning.
In Beijing, Maureen and Jeremiah will soon be wrapping up their trip to China.
Once again, let's invite Mr. Liu Mingzhe back to the stage.
Jeremiah wrote a report on his training in China and took it back to his country. Fascinated by China, Maureen has started to learn Mandarin in order to have a better understanding of the country.
Mozambique and other countries can benefit from cooperating with China. We've studied China's experience at various stages of development, and we're confident this experience can be our inspiration.
China, once a weak and impoverished country, has undergone a tremendous transformation rarely seen in human history. It's reinvigorating itself, re-emerging as a major economic powerhouse. It's also opening up and interacting with the world like never before. What has happened since the People's Republic of China was founded in 1949? How has the country engaged with the world in the last 70 years? This 5-episode documentary retraces the path China has taken, examining how it has impacted and has been impacted by the world. To build up a community of shared future for mankind, China believes that the world should uphold multilateralism. It's a principle it has maintained since the early days of New China. 75-year-old Qiao Zonghuai is a veteran diplomat. His father, Qiao Guanhua, was a former Chinese foreign minister. He led the first Chinese delegation to the United Nations headquarters in 1971 after China regained its seat in the UN.
From the very day New China was founded, we'd been working hard to get the whole world to recognize our national status. That day eventually came.
Beginning in the 1960s, the admission of the newly independent developing nations had gradually transformed the UN General Assembly. No longer was it Western-dominated. Instead, countries supportive of Beijing were holding sway. On October the 25th, 1971, the UN General Assembly passed Resolution 2758.
When the United Nations passed Resolution 2758, no representatives from China were present. The whole process was driven by countries that supported us. Chairman Mao said that it was our African brothers who carried us into the UN. Of the 76 votes in favor of Resolution 2758, 26 were cast by African countries. When the UN voted, there were also many European countries who voted in favor. As soon as China restored its membership at the UN, it regained a seat as a permanent member.
2 weeks later, a delegation from Beijing arrived in New York and took the seat reserved for China.
It was a very powerful delegation. The older generation of diplomats, including Chao Guanhua and Huang Hua, led the delegation to the UN General Assembly to attend the meeting.
A photograph showing Chao Guanhua laughing confidently won a Pulitzer Prize.
What did it show? It showed the status of our country and China's influence on the global stage, as well as the global trend of the times.
Since then, China has been a firm supporter of the UN. China is now the second largest UN donor after the US and the largest contributor to peacekeeping operations. China is fully committed to the UN's 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. It is making substantial progress in achieving the goals of global sustainable development, in particular through its contribution to poverty reduction. It has also established the China-UN Peace and Development Fund and South-South Cooperation Assistance Fund, through which it offers whatever assistance it can afford to other developing countries in implementing the UN agenda. China has also been promoting multilateralism in many other areas. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which China and its partners founded, has played a key role in combating terrorism in Central Asia. And China earned international acclaim among the G20 members for its positive contribution to stabilizing its own economy and aiding the world economic recovery in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis.
The ministerial conference so agrees.
China's admission into the World Trade Organization was another landmark event. The success was hard-earned. China's chief negotiator after 15 years of demanding negotiations was Long Yongtu.
If you want to achieve a win-win result, first of all, we have to be open. We have to open our market. Only if we open our market, the others will open their market.
China's WTO accession in 2001 was a watershed moment for China and the entire world. Since then, the country's integration with the global economy has gathered pace. China has called on the WTO to focus more on the concerns of developing members. It has consistently opposed unilateralism and protectionism and upheld the authority and effectiveness of the multilateral trading system.
Because China is the biggest market of the world, when China benefits from the economic globalization, the others are certainly also benefiting from China's opening of a market, which is the biggest in the world.
It's because China has a market of 1.4 billion people, and the purchasing power of this market is constantly growing.
China is connected everywhere. It's present everywhere. Chinese tourists are the biggest spenders internationally. I don't think anyone can hope to prosper without a connection to that market.
The community of shared future for mankind is much more than a conceptual idea. As a practical initiative, it's based on concrete plans. Xi'an, starting point of the ancient Silk Road. Today, it's a key point on the Silk Road economic belt, part of the Belt and Road Initiative, which aims to create a vast economic network spanning Eurasia and Africa. In Xi'an, Feng Jianjun's company is working around the clock on an order from Kazakhstan. It's the first time they're selling their display screens to Central Asia. Successful completion of the deal could mark the opening of a whole new market.
Production is currently underway, and the consignment will be dispatched tomorrow or the day after via the China-Europe Express.
Xi'an is striving to become China's largest inland port. From here, China-Europe Express trains reach more than 40 countries in Central Asia and Europe, regions where the emerging markets are attractive for small and medium-sized business owners like Feng.
In fact, these markets are easily overlooked by large manufacturers, but there are opportunities for our small and medium-sized enterprises.
Upgraded rail networks like the China-Europe Express offer an alternative to air and sea transport, and they allow inland cities like Xi'an to attract many more companies to set up shop. The railway is part of the Belt and Road Initiative proposed by Chinese President Xi Jinping. Since 2012, when Xi was elected General Secretary of the CPC Central Committee, China has adopted a more active diplomatic approach on the world stage. During his first 5-year term, Xi invited many foreign leaders to China and hosted a number of major international events, including the 2014 Beijing APEC Summit and the 2016 G20 Summit in Hangzhou. He also went on 29 overseas trips, taking him to 55 countries on 5 continents. China is advocating a new type of international relations.
President Xi mentioned this new model of international relations. It advocates mutual respect between major powers and equality between big and small countries.
In 2013, during a visit to Kazakhstan, Xi set out a plan that would attract the interest of the whole world, the creation of the Silk Road economic belt. A month later, in Indonesia, Xi said China was willing to work with the ASEAN countries to establish a maritime Silk Road for the 21st century.
Based on his insight into world trends and by combining China's development and international cooperation, President Xi proposed the Belt and Road Initiative. His goal is to focus on interconnection, deepening pragmatic cooperation, and working together to address the various challenges faced by mankind in order to realize mutual benefit and common development.
By September 2019, 136 countries plus 30 international organizations had signed 195 cooperative agreements under the Belt and Road Initiative. The Belt and Road Initiative has been cited in many UN documents. This Chinese proposal has become a global project. In connecting markets across continents, the Belt and Road Initiative is founded on a vast transport network, including the China-Europe Railway Express. By August 2019, over 16,000 China-Europe Express trains had travelled between Asia and Europe, serving 16 countries and 53 cities outside China. Since the first train left Chongqing in 2011, over 1.4 million containers have been delivered.
The China-Europe Express has experienced constant growth in terms of routes, frequency and cargo volume. It's now a very important platform for interconnection.
Well, there is no question that there are a lot of economic benefits. On the one hand, with respect to exports, Spain can benefit from the growing demand from Chinese consumers for European products of quality. And in fact, Spain has been exporting large amounts of meat, olive oil, wine, and other food and beverage products. So it will represent a big opportunity for Spanish companies to use this transport to China.
More and more goods, more and more services, more and more trains will follow the road, the Silk Road. So link, probably very important also to improve the relation and to improve the knowledge of people, one regarding the others. It's an important way of communicating.
I have received the monitors. Good selling, but need new pricing.
Okay, for all sides, we'll send the
Feng Jianjun's consignment reached Kazakhstan on the China-Europe Express in just 10 days, a third of the time it would have taken previously.
We can highlight the advantage of transport speed. This advantage will benefit our customers and become a source of their competitiveness on their local markets. I believe that our cooperation will further expand.
Thousands of kilometers away in Zamfara State, Nigeria, poor access to clean water and sanitation remains a major threat to the health of the local community. Supplying sufficient fresh water has been a major headache for the local government.
It causes a lot of diseases. There is waterborne diseases, there is measles, there guinea worm, and the rest. And it causes diarrhea and many other things.
Li Wenjong arrived in Nigeria 10 years ago. As an expert in water supply systems with Zhonghao Construction Engineering, he believed he could help solve the problem.
I've been working on the solar water supply project in Zamfara since 2013. I've worked in more than a dozen states across Nigeria. I've installed at least 500 sets of water supply equipment here.
In the course of the past decade, his team has trained numerous people across sub-Saharan Africa in drilling wells. Their latest solar well technology is capable of guaranteeing the water supply while protecting the ecological environment. Africa is emerging as a popular investment destination for thousands of Chinese companies like Li's. In this way, economic relations are evolving from unilateral government aid to comprehensive cooperation. The progress has been especially marked since the launch of the Belt and Road Initiative. In 2018, trade between China and the countries of Africa was worth over $200 billion. For 10 years in succession, China has been Africa's largest trading partner.
The Belt and Road can really contribute in terms of the kind of infrastructure gaps that we see in the world, the energy deficits that we see in the world, and the need to industrialize and add manufacturing jobs, decent jobs, in many countries around the world.
In 2017, the total value of imports and exports between China and its Belt and Road partners exceeded $1.4 trillion, a 13.4% increase from the year before. But profit is not the only driver in the Belt and Road Initiative. Improving the local economy and living standards in the countries involved through resource allocation and market connectivity will help the initiative achieve its visionary goals. After a day of hard work, another well has been sunk. In the near future, when all the planned solar wells are operating, Zamfara will become the first of Nigeria's 36 states to have full access to clean drinking water. This will mean a new start in life for its residents. While building up their business, Li Wenjong and the other Chinese nationals have worked hard to become integrated into the local community. On a personal level, they're forming bonds that transcend borders. In Dongying, East China's Shandong province, a hostage rescue training exercise is underway. The police unit is quickly deployed to surround the mob. Negotiations have broken down. A rioter is about to pull the trigger, but the bullet from the Chinese sniper gets him first. Such crisis resolution could become an everyday occurrence for the Chinese peacekeepers. The team belongs to the China Standby Peacekeeping Police Force, which was founded in 2016 following the country's decision to join the new United Nations Peacekeeping Capability Readiness System. China's Peacekeeping Police Force is stepping up its training in preparation for an upcoming assessment by UN officials.
The UN's advisory and assessment visit for peacekeeping police is different from that for peacekeeping troops and civilian forces. It's a comprehensive assessment and selection of all personnel.
To date, China has dispatched 13 peacekeeping police forces abroad. 8 were sent to Haiti and 5 to Liberia. But that's not all. Since 1990, the Chinese military has participated in 24 UN peacekeeping operations, dispatching more than 40,000 personnel. 13 Chinese soldiers have been killed on these missions. There's no war in China, But still, Chinese soldiers are making the ultimate sacrifice. By taking part in international peacekeeping missions, China is demonstrating its commitment to global security. It's also contributing to the creation of a shared future for mankind. In September 2015, Xi Jinping elaborated on this concept when he addressed the UN General Assembly for the first time. His speech laid out China's vision for a multipolar world. It explained Xi's own view on the role played in the world by China as it becomes richer and more powerful. In Xi's vision for building a better world, countries should seek partnerships rather than alliances. As Xi said, in today's world, no country can maintain absolute stability with its own efforts. A month after his speech, the concept was incorporated into a UN resolution on social development. Since then, the idea of a community of shared future for mankind has been endorsed by the UN Security Council, the UN Human Rights Council, and the UN General Assembly. Among all the global challenges, climate change is one of the most pressing. Due to climate change, any news about glaciers is invariably sad. In Switzerland, some 250 people dressed in black showed up at a special funeral for the Pizzol Glacier, which had, as they put it, been murdered by climate change. This was the second funeral for a melted glacier this year. For China, as it has transformed itself into a leading industrial power, the environmental cost has been huge. China has some of the largest, driest, hottest deserts in the world. The Saihanba Forest Farm is located on the southern edge of the Huanshandake Sandland. It was a barren desert little more than half a century ago. Now, through the efforts of 3 generations of local residents, it's become a forest covering more than 740 square kilometers. In 2017, the United Nations gave the Champions of the Earth Award to the Saihanba afforestation community in recognition of its efforts to create the largest man-made forest in the world. Following decades of effort, China's total desert area is now steadily shrinking by nearly 2,000 square kilometers every year. Nearly a quarter of all China's land will one day be covered by forest. China, at the same time as improving its domestic environment, is making itself a crucial player in the effort to mitigate the dangers of global warming. China is actively supporting the Paris Climate Accord by calling for consultation and coordinated action among countries.
The Paris Agreement is an important international treaty on climate change, concluded in Paris in December 2015. It also represents an important global effort under the UN Framework Convention on climate change to further implement the principles and goals of the convention and to jointly address climate change.
Without China, there would be no Paris Agreement. China is one of the founding fathers, if I could call it that, of the Paris Agreement, which comes also with a responsibility to make it happen. And I still have the sense when I talk to the Chinese delegation that there is a strong feeling of responsibility also in China for the Paris Agreement. So let's work together. Let's show that the European Union and China jointly can make a success out of the Paris Agreement.
President Xi has repeatedly referred to the importance of fighting climate change as an element of global governance. He has reaffirmed Beijing's commitment to slashing its CO2 emissions and called for the rest of the world to ensure that the endeavour is not derailed. The commitment is driven not only by projects coordinated by the country's environmental authorities, but also by the changing nature of the overall Chinese economy, which is shifting towards higher tech and services, and ultimately to low carbon output. The latest research has found that China is on track to reach its carbon goals under the Paris Agreement up to 9 years ahead of schedule.
In fact, to deal with climate change and abide by the Paris Climate Agreement is consistent with building a community of shared future for mankind. In fact, to deal with climate change is to deal with a global challenge.
Back at the training camp in Shandong, Zhao Jinyong, the Chief of Staff of Standby Peacekeeping Police Force, is observing closely. There's not long to go before the UN assessors arrive.
We have full confidence in passing the UN's assessment and advisory visit. It's not hard for our people.
Ultimately, all the Chinese peacekeeping police pass the UN selection test with flying colors.
We've been registered at the highest rapid deployment level in the UN Peacekeeping Capability Readiness System, for which units are deployed within 60 days for any UN peacekeeping mission.
The world today is facing numerous uncertainties and many challenges, including poverty, disease, financial risk, threats to cybersecurity, terrorism, and conflicts.
中国方案是构建人类命运共同体，实现共赢共享。
It needs a joint effort by all countries to meet the challenges and to build a genuine community of shared future for mankind.